They say home isn't always a place, it's a feeling. And for me, that feeling lived in a cabin tucked away behind a veil of pine and cedar nestled along the edge of a quiet lake that caught the morning sun like a secret. It wasn't much by most standards. No granite countertops, no smart appliances, no decorative landscaping that screamed curated luxury. But it was mine. Every board and beam held memory. Every creak of the floorboards was a whisper from my father, and the view of the lake. In the early hours, that was my church. I'd inherited the cabin after my father passed away 10 years ago. A man of few words, a Korean war vet, who worked his fingers to the bone in civil engineering. Dad had retreated to this place after retirement and found peace the world never gave him during the war. He built the place himself in the late 70s with help from a few drinking buddies and a lot of stubborn pride. The cabin sat on the last undeveloped stretch of land before the new Meadow Hills development took over, before manicured lawns and sterile sidewalks replaced blackberry thickets and fallen logs. When he died, there was no funeral, his request. Just the cabin, a folded flag, and a worn-out file folder of land documents yellowed with age and smell. I didn't touch the paperwork much. All I knew was he'd always said this here's Harperland, long before they built their gated dreams. He said it like a warning and a promise. I moved in 2 years after his passing, after my own kind of war. 15 years in the Army, 2 deployments, a failed marriage, and a son who barely knew my face. The cabin didn't judge. It welcomed me with its imperfections and gave me the quiet my soul ached for. I fixed it up, but never too much. The charm was in its truth, unvarnished, solid, and deeply rooted. For 5 years, I lived in harmony with the land and the seasons. Winters brought heavy silence, the kind that makes you confront your thoughts. Springs lured deer to the banks, and I'd watch them drink while sipping black coffee from a chipped mug my dad once used. Summers were a riot of frogs and distant fireworks, and fall. The fall was holy. The trees burned orange and gold, and the air felt clean enough to heal you. Then the Meadow Hills HOA came. It started with small things, flyers taped to my mailbox, friendly invitations to join Meadow Hills community improvement discussions. I ignored them. I didn't live in their cookie-cutter kingdom. I lived on the edge, quite literally. The Meadow Hills development had grown around me, encircling the lake, with identical homes, each painted in HOA-approved colors. But my cabin stood apart, both geographically and philosophically. Still, they persisted, knocked on my door once. A woman named Cheryl Tate, all smiles and power blazer, introduced herself as the Meadow Hills HOA vice president. "You've got such a quaint little place here," she said, looking past me into the living room. "We'd love to chat about bringing it up to code. For the harmony of the Meadow Hills neighborhood, of course." I told her I wasn't part of the Meadow Hills HOA, never signed anything, and my land had been deeded long before the association was even a thought. Her smile faltered for a beat. Then she said something I should have paid more attention to. "Well, communities evolve, and sometimes exceptions need to evolve with them." She left me a brochure. I burned it in the fire pit that night. For a while, that was the end of it. I continued my routines, fishing at dawn, restoring the dock, reading books that smelled of dust and wisdom. But attention began to rise like fog off the lake. Strangers walking dogs stopped to stare at my cabin. One neighbor asked if I'd considered remodeling. Another mentioned that property values were sensitive to non-conforming structures. I smiled and said nothing, but inside I felt a pressure I hadn't felt since Afghanistan, the creeping sense that someone had drawn a line in the sand and I'd missed the memo. The peace I once had was now laced with unease. I started checking the locks more often. I installed trail cams along the tree line, not out of paranoia, but habit. Something in the air had changed. It was no longer just my cabin by the lake. It had become an anomaly in a world desperate for uniformity. One morning, I found a notice staked into the edge of my property. It was laminated as if to dare the weather to wash it away. It read, "Final warning, structure in violation of Meadow Hills HOA Ordinance 12B. Non-compliant dwellings are subject to corrective action." Corrective action. The words pulsed like a threat. I took the notice inside and pinned it to the wall above the fireplace beside my father's old map of the lake. I stood there for a long time, staring at the red line that encircled the lake's edge, labeled Harper Boundary, Shoreline and Adjacent Acreage. It was the same line Dad had shown me when I was 10, when we canoed out to fish, and he told me this whole damn shoreline was ours, even if people forgot. I hadn't forgotten, not anymore. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat on the porch looking out across the still water. The stars were clear, the frogs were loud, and something in me stirred a warning bell in the back of my soul. I'd been quiet for too long. I didn't know it then, but war was coming. And this time it would come in the form of paperwork bulldozers and entitlement wrapped in legalese. But I had something they didn't. I had roots. And this land, this broken, beautiful, stubborn land, was about to teach them who really owned the shoreline. The next few weeks unfolded like a chess game I hadn't agreed to play. The Meadow Hills HOA moved with practiced subtlety, paperwork cloaked as courtesy gestures, dressed up as neighborhood improvement. I found another flyer tacked to my dock post. This one featured a glossy image of the newly renovated Meadow Hills Community Clubhouse, gleaming with its white-trimmed windows and pretentious slogan, "Where community meets class." The irony wasn't lost on me. I tossed the flyer into the trash with the same disdain I held for their entire operation. Meadow Hills HOA meetings, newsletters, neighborhood beautification campaigns, none of it applied to me, or so I thought. Then came the visits. Not from Cheryl Tate this time, but a woman named Karen Holt, the Meadow Hills HOA president. The name alone oozed smugness. Karen drove a brand new electric SUV and wore blazers with the community logo stitched just above her heart, like some kind of badge of authority. She didn't knock, she called out, "Hello, Mr. Harper." Her voice cut through the morning bird song as I worked on replacing a railing on the porch. Got a moment. I stood up slowly, the screwdriver still in hand. "What do you need?" She smiled, like a woman trying to sell you something you didn't want. "We've had a few concerns from residents about your property's alignment with Meadow Hills HOA standards. Aesthetic integration zoning setbacks, emergency vehicle access, you know the usual." I crossed my arms. "I'm not in your HOA." "Well, technically, no," she conceded. "But your property is now adjacent to our jurisdiction, and the Meadow Hills Community Charter gives us discretionary oversight when non-conforming structures present a potential impact on neighborhood value." There it was, neighborhood value, their holy grail. "I don't care about your discretionary anything," I replied. "My cabin predates your HOA by at least 3 decades. You have no authority here." Karen's smile faded slightly. "I understand you feel that way, but we have legal frameworks that allow for environmental and visual impact assessments. That shoreline, for instance, is now part of the Meadow Hills community's recreational zone. Your cabin's condition has been deemed an eyesore. We'll need to see progress toward compliance." I stepped forward. "You mean my home?" She shifted her stance. "We're asking for cooperation." "And I'm declining," I said. "This conversation is over." She looked past me toward the dock and the weathered cabin behind me, then nodded once and walked away like a woman who thought patience was power. But I'd seen people like her before, polite invaders. Bureaucrats with time and backing used to winning because people get tired. But I wasn't tired. Not yet. A week later, I received a formal letter. Not a flyer, not a warning. An official cease and desist notice, complete with Meadow Hills HOA letterhead, legal citations, and a timeline. It stated that my property was in gross violation of community visual guidelines, and failure to remediate within 30 days would result in corrective measures, including potential demolition. I read it 3 times. The audacity was almost comical if it hadn't been so chilling. They were serious. They wanted to erase my home, my father's legacy. They wanted to flatten it in the name of property value and recreational consistency. I walked out to the porch and looked at the cabin, the beams still strong despite the weather, the porch sagging just enough to show its age like a smile line on an old face. I called a lawyer, a veteran like me now, specializing in property disputes. I sent him the letter, scanned the deed my father left, and explained the history. He sounded confident. "If the deed's clean, they've got nothing," he said, "just noise. You're not under their bylaws. We can file a preemptive injunction if they move forward." I felt better. A little. But I knew how these things worked. Meadow Hills HOA boards had money and time. They didn't need to be right. They just had to outlast you. So I prepared. I documented everything. Took photos of the property, the boundary markers, even the wildflowers growing along the lake path. I organized Dad's old land surveys and highlighted the legal boundary lines. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for memory, for dignity, for proof that people like us still had the right to live outside their perfect little plans. Then they started showing up again. Not just Karen and her board members, but landscapers, contractors, strangers with clipboards walking the edge of my property, pretending not to see me as they snapped photos. One of them climbed onto my dock to measure erosion. I confronted him. "This is private property," I said. He shrugged. "Meadow Hills HOA sent me. They said this shoreline falls under their stewardship program. Just assessing." "Leave," I said flatly. He did, but not without a smirk. The next day, I installed security cameras. The day after that, I posted signs. Private property. No trespassing. The signs were torn down within hours. This wasn't just about aesthetics. This was war by attrition. They were trying to push me out not through force, but through exhaustion. And they were winning. Because even though I had the law on my side, I started to feel hunted. I found myself waking in the middle of the night, listening for trucks worrying they'd come while I slept. I kept my boots by the door, my phone fully charged. I even stored a USB drive with all my legal documents in a waterproof container beneath the porch. The paranoia wasn't irrational. I knew what they were capable of. Because in the end, the Meadow Hills HOA isn't about neighborhood harmony. It's about control. And I was the last thing they couldn't control. That made me dangerous. That made me a target. It was a Tuesday morning when the first real threat arrived, not veiled in bureaucratic language or vague insinuations, but stamped in red official ink. I'd just finished patching a window frame on the west side of the cabin when I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A white SUV with Meadow Hills HOA decals pulled into my driveway like it owned the place. Two men stepped out, one in khakis and a collared shirt clipboard in hand. The other wore a neon orange vest and carried a measuring wheel like he was about to stake out the grounds for a new subdivision. Their movements were too practiced, too confident. I stood still, my hammer still in hand, watching from the porch. "Good morning," clipboard said, walking toward me like we were old friends. "You must be Mr. Harper." "I'm Mike Tate, Meadow Hills HOA compliance officer. This is Rick, our contractor liaison." "I didn't ask for a visit," I said. He chuckled, flipping through the pages on his clipboard. "No, but we're here as part of a formal inspection process initiated under Section 14C of our Meadow Hills Community Ordinances. We've received multiple complaints, and as you may know, your property borders common access land managed by the Meadow Hills HOA. There are implications. Implications for who, I asked sharply. Because I've got deeds that say this land isn't yours." Mike paused, but didn't back off. "We understand your position. However, given the proximity to shared recreational zones, your structure is considered a visual and environmental disruption. You've already been issued formal notice. This visit is to evaluate compliance progress. If no progress is made, the Meadow Hills HOA reserves the right to take corrective action." I felt the heat rise in my chest. "Corrective action." He nodded, flipping to the last page. "Demolition is a last resort, but it is an option. Section 14F outlines procedures for community protection. Unsafe or non-compliant dwellings may be removed at cost to the owner or in absence of cooperation billed through community tax allocation." I laughed bitter and loud. "You think you can bulldoze my house and charge me for it?" Rick, the contractor, finally spoke. "Sir, I'm just here to measure the setback lines. It's standard." "No, it's not," I snapped. "Not on private property. You step 1 foot past that oak tree I pointed and you'll be trespassing." Rick hesitated. Mike offered a tight smile. "We'll log your refusal as non-compliance. Just so you're aware, this situation will escalate if you don't engage." I leaned in, my voice low. "You're damn right it'll escalate." They left, but slowly. Mike made sure to walk along the shoreline before he got back into the SUV, eyes scanning every inch of the dock and the canoe my dad built decades ago. That canoe had carried me through grief when I lost my mother, through long nights after my deployment, and through the quiet hours that healed me. Now it was being reduced to an eyesore. They didn't understand what they were provoking. That night, I pulled out every document I had. The deed from 1979, hand-signed by the county clerk. The surveyor's report my father had commissioned in 1982, outlining the boundary lines of the lakefront acreage. The Harper name was stamped on every sheet. This wasn't some squatter's hideaway. This was a legacy, and I wasn't about to let a group of suburban tyrants erase it because it didn't fit their pastel vision board. I sent copies to my lawyer. He called me back 2 hours later. "Legally, you're on solid ground," he said. "But here's the catch. They're not coming at you through ownership claims. They're using zoning reinterpretations and environmental clauses. It's legal guerrilla warfare. They know they can't win in court, so they're trying to build a case that your structure presents a community risk, fire hazard, unstable foundation, erosion risk, anything that'll stick." "So what do?" I asked. "Get ready," he replied, "because the next step is enforcement. You need eyes on your property at all times. Cameras, neighbors who will testify, and whatever you do, don't leave for more than a day." I didn't plan to. The next morning, I found a stack of envelopes stuffed in my mailbox. Fines. Backdated, itemized, fabricated. 150 years for visual obstruction. $200 for unapproved shoreline modification. $75 for unauthorized exterior color. They were trying to bury me in paper cuts. But I wasn't bleeding yet. I called the county records office to request a certified copy of my property map. The clerk remembered my dad. Her voice softened when she said his name. "Your father helped design that retention system near the West Bank, didn't he?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "That's him." "You know," she added, lowering her voice like we were swapping secrets, "I don't think most of those Meadow Hills HOA folks realize your shoreline wasn't included in the original community plat. It was carved out as independent. We have that on file." My pulse quickened. "Can you send me everything you've got?" She did. The next day, I added a laminated copy of that shoreline map to the front gate right next to the no trespassing sign. It outlined exactly what was mine, and more importantly, what wasn't theirs. But it didn't stop them. Later that week, a Meadow Hills community newsletter landed in every mailbox but mine. A neighbor brought me a copy, eyes wide with concern. "They're calling a vote," she whispered. "Special Meadow Hills HOA meeting. Emergency funding to enforce non-compliant property penalties." They even mentioned eminent domain. My hands trembled as I read the passage. "And to maintain the Meadow Hills community's integrity and safety, the board proposes allocating funds for direct corrective enforcement regarding non-conforming lakefront structures. Compliance is no longer optional." They were setting the stage. And I realized this wasn't about the cabin anymore. It never was. It was about power, control. And I was the last remaining piece they couldn't touch without a fight. They wanted to make an example out of me. And if they thought I'd go down quietly, they hadn't read the right kind of history. It was supposed to be a quick trip, 2 days, maybe 3. My son Matthew had finally agreed to meet me for coffee. In the next county over a milestone I'd been waiting for since our relationship strained after the divorce. He was 22 now, working nights, living his own life. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year. When he called and said, "Let's talk," I didn't hesitate. I locked up the cabin, left the security cameras running, asked my neighbor Pam to keep an eye out, and hit the road with cautious hope. The coffee shop was quiet. Matthew looked tired but not angry. We talked about Mom, about the war, about why I never called enough. For once, we didn't fight. We just listened. We sat for 3 hours, 2 cups each, and when he hugged me before I left, I felt something crack open, a tenderness I hadn't dared to hope for. It was late when I checked my phone. No missed calls, no motion alerts from the cabin. I drove to a cheap motel on the edge of town, slept heavier than I had in months, and woke up ready to go home. What I returned to wasn't home anymore. From the highway exit, I noticed the plume of dust rising above the treetops. The road to my land was blocked by 2 orange cones and a fresh sign that read, "Construction zone, do not enter." My heart hammered in my chest. I pushed past the cones in my truck, ignoring the sign. Gravel spat under my tires as I turned the last bend, and then I saw it. The cabin, my father's cabin, was gone. Not damaged, not altered. Gone. Where once stood the porch where I drank coffee each sunrise now was a patch of flattened dirt and splintered wood bulldozed into unrecognizable debris. The dock had been torn apart. The canoe dragged up onto land like a dead fish, its belly cracked. I slammed the brakes and stumbled out of the truck, boots crunching on broken glass and nails. My knees gave out halfway to the rubble. They did it. They actually did it. I don't remember how long I stood there swaying in the wind. long enough for Pam to come jogging over from her yard shouting my name. Jake, oh God, Jake, I tried to stop them. She was crying, breathless. They came yesterday morning, 2 dump trucks, an excavator, some guys in vests. I ran over and told them you weren't home. They wouldn't listen, said it was authorized. I called the sheriff, but by the time he got here, it was already half gone. They showed him some paperwork. He just stood there. I turned slowly. Did they say who sent them? She nodded. Karen Holt and Cheryl Tate. They were standing up on the ridge, watching. I couldn't speak. Pam squeezed my arm. Jake, I'm so sorry. I thought they wouldn't dare. Oh, they dared. I walked through the wreckage like a ghost, careful not to cut myself on the shattered memories. I found the cornerstone of the fireplace half buried in mud. My dad's initials carved in the concrete split clean down the middle. I dropped to my knees and wept, not because of the cabin alone, but because of what it represented. My past, my father, my recovery. All gone because a handful of petty tyrants in golf shirts didn't like how it looked from their paddle boats. By the time I stood again, something had shifted inside me. Grief turned into resolve. Pain sharpened into focus. I wasn't going to fight this with emotion. I was going to fight it with precision. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. I showed him the photos. The before and after drone footage from my security cams, the time-stamped notices, the deed, the emails, the newsletter. He sat quietly through it all, then took off his glasses and leaned forward. This is bigger than a property dispute, he said. This is unlawful demolition of private property, criminal trespass, destruction of heritage. And if your cameras caught them directing it. They did, I interrupted. Karen and Cheryl Tate. Clear as day. Then we've got them. He outlined the plan like a military op. Injunctions, restraining orders, civil lawsuits. We'd go after the Meadow Hills HOA as an entity, and after Karen and Cheryl Tate personally. We'd subpoena the demolition company, the contractors, even the sheriff. We'd file a motion with the county to suspend the HOA's operating license pending investigation. But that's just the start, he said, a slow smile spreading. Because you said something, Jake, about the shoreline. I nodded. My father owned it. The cabin was on the tip, but the deed includes the shoreline and the land beneath the Meadow Hills Community Clubhouse. He blinked. Their clubhouse. I pulled out the surveyor's report, built in 2006. Meadow Hills HOA never secured title on the strip it sits on. County records still show it as Harper Land. His smile grew wider. Then we're not just defending. We're going on offense. That night, I didn't sleep. I went back to the lake and sat on the stones where the porch used to be. The moon reflected off the water like a blade. I remembered my father's voice. Never start a fight, but if it comes to you, finish it right. This wasn't just revenge, it was reclamation. They took my past. Now I'd take back the future. The next morning, I stood at the edge of what used to be my life. The wreckage of my cabin was now cordoned off with bright yellow plastic tape like it was a crime scene, which ironically, it was. Not that the Meadow Hills HOA saw it that way. To them, it was just another eyesore eliminated. One step closer to their vision of perfection. I didn't move. I stood there as the sun rose over the lake, casting long shadows over the broken boards, the torn roofing, the crumbled brick of the chimney that once warmed my father's bones. I looked at each piece of ruin, and something in me hardened like steel cooling under pressure. Then I saw it half buried in the dirt. A metal box, rusted but intact, poking out from where the floor used to be. I knelt and dug it out with my bare hands. It was heavy, locked. My heart skipped. I recognized it immediately. It was Dad's fireproof strongbox. For years, it had sat under the floorboards, hidden between the old joists, beneath his armchair. I'd never opened it. Didn't think I needed to. But now as I brushed away the dust and debris, I felt like I was holding a time capsule. A key. I pried it open with a crowbar. Inside were paper-wrapped bundles meticulously labeled. Land surveys, tax receipts, old letters. And at the bottom, a thick envelope with my name written in my father's sharp, blocky handwriting. Jake, for when it matters. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a notarized document dated 1979. The original deed. To the land, not just the cabin lot, but the entire shoreline curve, from the western pine break to the northern bend, and underneath the clubhouse. There were annotations too. My father's notes. legal clauses, a boundary map that highlighted in red what was Harper land and what wasn't. I stared at it, my mind racing, every memory of him saying, "We own the water," echoing in my skull. They hadn't just destroyed a building, they'd built their entire clubhouse on my land. Fueled by adrenaline, I scanned every document, digitized them, and forwarded them to my lawyer with one line. "We strike now." He responded within the hour. "I've drafted the cease and desist. This is a bombshell. We file the trespass claim today and request an emergency injunction tomorrow. You sure about the clubhouse?" I zoomed in on the survey. I'm sure. It was a classic oversight, one that wouldn't have mattered unless someone got mad enough or stubborn enough to look. My father must have known this day could come, that they'd push and push until someone had to push back. He'd prepared for war, and I'd inherited the arsenal. Later that afternoon, I drove into town and walked into the Meadow Hills HOA office, like a man with nothing left to lose. Cheryl Tate was sitting behind the reception desk, tapping away on a silver laptop, fake smile plastered across her face, like makeup that never fully dried. She looked up and blinked. "Oh, Mr. Harper." "Don't," I said, voice cold. "Don't say anything polite. You know what you did." "I'm sorry, but if you'd like to discuss a grievance, you'll need to make an appointment with—" "No. You'll want to get Karen," I said. "Because as of 10 minutes ago, your clubhouse sits on my land, and your demolition crew just trespassed and destroyed private property protected by county deed. That's felony-level damage, civil and criminal. And now I'm coming for both." Her smile disappeared. "I don't think you understand." I pulled the folder from under my arm and placed the top page gently in front of her. The deed, the map, the certified county seal. "I understand just fine," I said. "And if you don't believe me, the sheriff and a county judge will explain it in clearer terms." Behind her, I heard the creak of the office door. Karen stepped out, coffee mug in hand. Her expression faltered when she saw me. "Jake," she said, "look, I understand you're upset, but you destroyed my home," I said. "You violated my rights, and you used intimidation and fraud to get away with it. Until now." She stepped forward, feigning calm. "We acted under legal advice. Your property was deemed non-compliant, and we followed our procedure. Your procedure is about to get audited by a district judge." I leaned in inches from her face. "You wanted me gone. You wanted to erase the only thing I had left. But you made a mistake." She frowned. "What mistake?" I stepped back and smiled for the first time in days. "You built your precious little empire on my dirt hall." Back at the lake, I watched from the ridge. As the sun dipped below the trees, its golden light washing across the calm water. The clubhouse loomed on the far shore, white siding, expansive deck, the jewel of their domain. But now to me it looked temporary, fragile. I imagined the board scrambling behind closed doors, calling emergency meetings, running their hands through the graying hair as they realized just how deeply they'd stepped into it. They didn't just mess with a homeowner. They messed with a Harper. That night, I lit a fire in a small pit where the old chimney had been. I sat in silence, wrapped in a blanket, the strongbox beside me. For the first time since the demolition, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a storm on the horizon, and the Meadow Hills HOA had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I drove to the county records office with my father's strongbox beside me on the passenger seat like a war chest. There was something symbolic about walking into a government building with dusty paper instead of rage, like showing up to a gunfight with a filing cabinet. The clerk behind the counter looked up with the kind of practiced neutrality that only decades of public service could produce. Her name tag read Marla, and she had glasses that hung on a chain around her neck. "Can I help you?" I placed the survey deed and annotated shoreline map gently on the counter. "I need these verified and certified again. Originals dated 1979. My father was James Harper." Her eyes lit up slightly at the name. "James Harper," she said. "I remember him. He did flood mitigation plans for the east side, didn't he?" "That's him." She thumbed through the documents with care, her trained eye immediately scanning for seals and notary stamps. "You don't see many like this anymore," she muttered. "All hand-signed. Filed before the digital archive migration. That's why it never popped up in our system. But this," she tapped the survey sketch, "this is a gem." She leaned in. "This shows your land runs underneath parcel 11C. I nodded. "Which is now the Meadow Hills HOA's clubhouse." She sat back blinking. "And you have never sold it, never transferred it, never even considered it," I said. "The cabin sat on the shoreline edge, but the title includes that bend and the flat ground just beyond it." My dad used to say they'd build on it one day. Guess they did. She chuckled, then became very still. You realize what this means, Mr. Harper? I do. She stood and disappeared into a back room. 10 minutes later, she returned with a file folder nearly identical to the one my father had left behind, county copy timestamped and scanned. She placed it beside mine, and the alignment was perfect. Seal for seal. Ink for ink. This is valid, she said. We'll process a certified update and send confirmation to the registrar and property tax office. That land is yours. With the certified copies in hand, I stopped next at the local newspaper office. I didn't go there for sympathy or exposure. I went for a copy of the 2006 public announcement when the Meadow Hills HOA Clubhouse was built. It took the archivist 10 minutes to find it. Front page. New Meadow Hills HOA Clubhouse to elevate community life. The article quoted Karen Holt, even then, the acting board president, thanking the county for expedited permits and applauding the community collaboration. There were smiling residents holding gold shovels, a ribbon-cutting ceremony beside the lake, and one telling detail buried halfway down the column. The Meadow Hills HOA thanks adjacent landowners for their flexibility and confirms the new structure will sit on Parcel 11C, believed to be part of a previously unclaimed shoreline zone. Believed, oh. That word jumped off the page like an exposed wire. They built their symbol of power based on an assumption. Never formally checked the deed. Never reached out. Never filed for annexation or title transfer. Because they thought I or my father wasn't watching. They were wrong. Back home, I stood across the lake from the clubhouse. I'd lived in its shadow for years. Now I saw it differently, not as a fortress, but a liability. Its deck jutted out into my water. Its parking lot cracked over my soil. Its flagpole was rooted in my inheritance. And it was all built illegally. I spent the rest of the day poring over every document my father left behind. Sketches, letters, a journal tucked inside the lining of the strongbox. It wasn't just a stash of paperwork. It was a blueprint for a fight he never got to finish. One journal entry stopped me cold. The lake will outlast us, but if they come for the land, Jake will know. He'll see through their smiles. I just hope he's ready. I closed the journal, heart pounding. Dad knew. Even back then he knew. He didn't trust the Meadow Hills HOA. Didn't trust what the community would become once it outgrew its own humility. So he documented everything, locked it away, and passed the burden on to me, not as a curse, but as a trust. I was ready now. That evening, my lawyer and I met in his office. The smell of old books and ink gave the room a gravity that made it easier to breathe. I've reviewed everything he said, flipping through the newly certified documents. They're not just in violation. They're in breach. You can sue for damages, back rent trespass, emotional distress, and if you want, file for forcible removal. I shook my head. Not yet. I want them to see it first. He raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I want to watch their faces when they realize the land under their thrones isn't theirs. I want them to feel what I felt when I came home and found my cabin gone. He leaned back in his chair. You don't want revenge, do you? No, I said. I want recognition, and then restitution. We drafted a formal letter. It was crisp, clinical, and legally airtight. Attached were the surveys, the deed, the county registrar certification, and a request for immediate cessation of all activity on the clubhouse grounds. It also included a polite but firm warning. Failure to vacate the premises or enter good faith negotiation within 5 business days will result in legal action, including but not limited to removal fines and seizure of structures built on unlawfully held land. I signed the bottom with a steady hand. The next morning, the letter was hand-delivered to the Meadow Hills HOA office. That night, I didn't light a fire. I simply sat at the edge of the lake, feet in the water, and stared at the clubhouse across the way. It stood there in the dark like a castle built on sand. And I knew that for the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one living in fear. They were. The letter was delivered on a Monday morning by certified courier. No signature required, just a witness. My lawyer insisted we keep a record of everything from now on. Every interaction, every word. A war may be fought with fire, he told me, but justice is won with paper. I imagined Karen Holt opening the envelope with her usual arrogance, expecting some passive-aggressive rebuttal or a plea for forgiveness. But instead, what she found was a legal wrecking ball, clear, specific, and enforceable. Every page outlined the extent of their violation. Every document traced ownership back to my father's hand. The survey, the deed, the public record all aligned like artillery sights. By noon, the Meadow Hills HOA office had gone dark. No new flyers, no emails, no door-to-door updates. The silence was deafening. On Tuesday, I received an email, not from Karen, not from Cheryl Tate, but from the Meadow Hills HOA's attorney, a man named Philip Weiss, from a firm I recognized from city council disputes. Mr. Harper, we have received your notice and accompanying documentation. The board is reviewing the matter and would like to schedule a meeting to discuss potential resolutions. Please provide availability within the next 5 business days. Regards, a Philip Weiss escrow. I forwarded it to my lawyer with one line. They blinked. He called me within minutes. Don't meet them alone, and don't meet them on their turf. We scheduled the meeting for Thursday morning at my lawyer's office. Neutral ground, controlled space. No surprises. That day, I dressed the way my father taught me when entering enemy territory. Simple, direct, unshakable. Clean jeans, ironed shirt, leather boots. I arrived early and sat in the waiting room with a cup of coffee, watching the lake through the wide windows. The water was calm, as if waiting. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, flanked by Cheryl Tate and Philip Weiss. The 3 of them looked like a funeral procession, stiff, colorless, and drained of the smug energy they usually carried like armor. My lawyer, Jack, ushered us into the conference room. Documents were already spread across the table like evidence at a trial. Philip opened with a predictable line. We're hoping to avoid litigation. Jack nodded. Then let's start by acknowledging the facts. They tried to spin it, of course. Philip said, the Meadow Hills HOA had acted in good faith. That the boundary error was unintentional based on outdated zoning maps. That the demolition of the cabin was unfortunate, but justifiable, under Community Emergency Code 12F. I let them talk. I let them bury themselves in euphemisms and soft-spoken deceit. But when Karen tried to explain why the demolition had been necessary, I leaned forward. Karen, I said quietly, you authorized the destruction of my home, my father's home, without a court order. Without due process, on land you didn't own. You watched it happen, and now you want me to forget it because it's inconvenient for you. She didn't meet my eyes. I continued. You stood on the ridge while they tore down a man's life with a backhoe. That wasn't enforcement, that was erasure. Cheryl Tate spoke, then her voice thin. We didn't know the land was still under your name. It wasn't clear. I pulled out the county certification. This says otherwise. Certified last week. Registrar stamp. Harper Land shoreline, and all. Philip cleared his throat. Mr. Harper, what would a satisfactory resolution look like to you? I looked at Jack. He gave me a small nod. I want acknowledgement, I said. Public, written, signed by every board member. You admit that the cabin was wrongfully demolished and that the clubhouse sits on land you don't own. Karen's jaw clenched. That could damage Meadow Hills community morale. I cut her off. You damaged your community the moment you decided your rules mattered more than human dignity. Philip scribbled something in his notebook. I continued. Second, you cease all operations in the clubhouse until we resolve ownership. No events, no board meetings, no HOA functions. The property is trespassing until you come to terms. Cheryl Tate leaned forward. We can't just shut it down. You can, I said, or I'll file for injunction by Friday. And the third condition, Philip asked. I let the pause hang. You rebuild my cabin, I said finally. To code to dimension as close to the original as possible. And you pay for it. Not the homeowners, the board. Philip blinked. That's fair, Jack interrupted. Karen looked like she might choke. I'd also consider long-term lease negotiations, I added calmly. If the Meadow Hills HOA wants to continue using the clubhouse, we can discuss back rent, starting from 2006. It was Cheryl Tate who cracked first. That could bankrupt us, she whispered. No, I said. That could humble you. The meeting ended with no shouting, no fists slammed on tables, just signatures legalese, and the slow unraveling of an empire built on stolen ground. They had 5 days to respond. Jack told them flat out after that the gloves come off. When I walked out of the building, I felt lighter. Not because I'd won anything yet, but because I was no longer on the defensive. I'd taken back the narrative. Taken back the ground, literally and figuratively. The cabin was still gone. Nothing could undo that. But what came next would carry the weight of my father's intentions, my own resolve, and the truth. They'd started this war with arrogance. I'd finish it with ownership. The silence that followed the meeting was a different kind of loud. In the days after the terms were presented, the Meadow Hills HOA board disappeared from sight. No newsletters, no updates. The clubhouse, once buzzing with committees and events, went dark. A chain hung across the driveway. The marquee out front, usually filled with reminders about trash day and community bingo, now just read, "Under review." Pam, my neighbor, came by with a dish of baked ziti and a glint in her eye. "You did something," she said, setting the dish on what remained of my porch. "They're falling apart." I didn't say much, just thanked her and watched the lake. Word was spreading fast. Residents who once kept their heads down were now questioning everything. Meadow Hills HOA budgets, decisions, past fines. Stories began surfacing, minor infractions that turned into major penalties, threats of foreclosure over lawn ornaments, families bullied for not painting their doors neutral beige. It was as if the lid had come off a pressure cooker no one realized was even hot. The more people talked, the more the truth unraveled, and the more the board panicked. On Wednesday, just 3 days after the letter was delivered, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. "Mr. Harper." The voice was low, cautious. "Yes, this is David Lang. I'm on the Meadow Hills HOA board, or at least I was until yesterday." "Go on." "There's going to be an emergency session tonight. Off the books. Karen and Cheryl Tate want to vote on allocating funds to settle privately with you and keep the clubhouse operational under a quiet use agreement." I said nothing. "They're afraid," he continued. "They're afraid of you, of losing the entire structure, literally. And they don't want residents to know how badly they screwed up." I leaned against the truck. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I was never on board with what they did. The demolition, the silence. It's all been a nightmare. And frankly, I think it's time someone burned it down. Figuratively, I mean." I chuckled. "Figuratively works for me. I'm just saying, keep an eye on the clubhouse tomorrow. I don't think they're going to last through the week." He hung up before I could ask anything else. That night, the Meadow Hills HOA's private meeting took place at Cheryl Tate's house instead of the usual conference room. But small towns don't keep secrets well, especially when you invite 10 board members and half of them bring spouses. By morning, rumors were flying. Pam texted me at dawn. Karen and Cheryl Tate just resigned, confirmed by 2 neighbors. It felt anticlimactic at first. No apologies, no public acknowledgement, just resignation slips and a hurried exit. But I knew it was the start of something bigger. Jack, my lawyer, called 2 hours later. "The board has responded," he said. "They're accepting all your terms, in writing." I sat down in the dirt where the steps used to be. All of them. Every last one. The public letter. Ceasing clubhouse use. Full reimbursement for the cabin reconstruction. They've also requested to open negotiations for leasing the clubhouse land. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. And the residents, words out. I've already had 4 other homeowners ask for referrals. "You started something here, Jake." I looked out at the lake. The water was still again, clear, peaceful, the way it used to be. "No," I said quietly. "They did. I just didn't let them finish it." Later that afternoon, I took a walk around the property. My property, with a surveyor and contractor in tow. We marked the original cabin's dimensions, pulled out old photos to match the porch placement, window spacing, even the wind vane shaped like a trout that had once spun on the roof. I showed them where my dad's armchair used to sit, where the stove would hum in the winter, where I'd sat broken and bruised after coming home from my second tour. They took measurements and notes, but more than that, they listened. This wasn't just a rebuild. It was a resurrection. The next day, a notice appeared on the Meadow Hills Community Bulletin Board. Typed, laminated, and signed by the interim board president. To all residents. The Meadow Hills HOA acknowledges that the demolition of Mr. Harper's cabin was a result of administrative overreach and incorrect assumptions regarding property boundaries. As a result, the Meadow Hills HOA clubhouse will be closed until further notice. We are working closely with Mr. Harper and the county to rectify the situation. We regret the distress this situation has caused and are committed to full transparency moving forward. Meadow Hills HOA Interim Board. It wasn't poetic, but it was public, and that mattered. Residents began reaching out. One woman baked me a pie. Another brought me a box of tools her husband didn't use anymore. Some just offered nods, respectful and quiet. Even the sheriff stopped by. "I owe you an apology," he said, stepping out of his cruiser with his hat in hand. "I should have looked closer that day. I let them wave papers in my face and bully you out of your own land." "You've got a second chance now," I said. "Use it." He nodded. "You ever think about running for board?" I laughed. "Let's not get crazy." As the week closed, I stood once again on the ridge, this time with a foundation plan in my hands and the sound of hammers in the distance. The new cabin would take months to build, but every board, every nail would come with purpose. No more hiding, no more waiting. Justice had landed not with fury, but with firmness. I hadn't burned the system down, I'd simply showed it who owned the ground it stood on. I thought winning would feel more explosive. Like a final scene in a war film, flags, waving music swelling some grand gesture of triumph. But the truth is, when you spend weeks walking through ash and paperwork, victory feels more like silence, stillness. A breath finally exhaled. The morning they removed the clubhouse sign, I watched from the edge of the shoreline, with my coffee in hand. Two men in gray uniforms stood on ladders unbolting the Meadow Hills HOA emblem that had lorded over the community entrance for nearly 2 decades. The letters came down one by one, each clink of metal on pavement, a small symphony of justice. HOA Clubhouse became Club, then just C, then nothing at all. Behind them, the building stood empty, the parking lot abandoned. The echo of lawn committee meetings and wine tastings faded into memory. I didn't smile. Not yet. There was still work to do. That same afternoon, I met with the new Meadow Hills HOA board interim members, mostly residents, who'd never aspired to leadership but stepped up when they saw the cracks. We sat under a canvas tent on a borrowed lot, folding chairs, creaking beneath us, the lake shimmering nearby like a mirror to the past. The atmosphere was different, measured, cautious, respectful. Mr. Harper said, Lorna, the newly appointed president. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed and pragmatic. "We've reviewed the lease proposal your lawyer submitted. We're prepared to sign." Jack passed her the paperwork. "This lease grants the Meadow Hills HOA continued use of the clubhouse building for a 5-year term," he explained. "Mr. Harper retains full land ownership and will receive monthly rent based on market value. All maintenance and liability remain with the HOA. No alterations without written consent. If the HOA dissolves or defaults, the structure reverts to Mr. Harper." She nodded. "We accept." No one flinched. No one protested. They understood this was mercy, not obligation. Additionally, I added, "I'm requesting a community hearing next month. Open to all residents. I want the truth documented. I want my father's name cleared. And I want the destruction of the cabin publicly recognized as unlawful." Lorna didn't hesitate. Done. Cheryl Tate and Karen were gone. Cheryl Tate had quietly listed her home and moved to a suburb 2 towns over. Karen, I heard, was facing civil litigation, not just from me, but from 3 other homeowners who had been penalized under her tenure. The Meadow Hills HOA's legal fund was bleeding, and the board was scrambling to stay afloat. None of that brought my cabin back, but it brought accountability, and that mattered. Construction began 2 weeks later. I hired local contractors, guys who knew the soil, the wind, the weight of snow in the rafters come winter. They didn't just build, they rebuilt. Each nail they hammered felt like a heartbeat returned. The floor plan followed my father's original sketch, but I added a few touches of my own, a reinforced foundation, a wraparound porch, solar panels hidden among the shingles. This time, the cabin would outlive me. Pam stopped by, often bringing lemonade and unsolicited advice. "You should plant lavender on the west side," she said once. "It catches the sunset better." "You volunteering to help," she winked. "I'm old, not useless." Matthew visited twice. The first time he was quiet, overwhelmed by the sight of the cleared land and half-framed beams. The second time, he brought his girlfriend, and I saw him smile in a way that reminded me of when he was 6. Barefoot, muddy, holding a frog he swore could talk. "Daddy said," placing a hand on my shoulder, "I'm proud of you." I didn't know how much I needed to hear that until the moment it left his lips. The Meadow Hills community hearing happened on a bright Saturday morning. Dozens of residents gathered in folding chairs on the lakefront, facing a small podium and a microphone powered by a car battery. Jack read a statement. Lorna followed with an apology. Then I spoke. I told them about the cabin, about my father, about the history no one had bothered to learn before bulldozers arrived. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse, I just told the truth. And when I was done, the crowd stood not all at once, but slowly ripple by ripple, like the wind crossing the lake. Applause rose, not thunderous, but honest. And healing. By fall, the new cabin was nearly finished. I planted lavender on the west side, just like Pam suggested. Rehung the wind vane. Installed the same firewood rack my father used to keep beneath the porch. One evening, I lit the fireplace for the first time, watching the smoke curl into the dusk. It smelled like cedar and memory. That night, I sat on the new porch and watched the lights blink on across the lake. The clubhouse had reopened, modest, now quieter, humbled. A small sign hung outside, Community Hall, land leased from the Harper family. I didn't need them to worship me, just to remember, to our respect, that finally had arrived. I never asked for this fight. I never wanted headlines or courtroom victories. I just wanted to live in peace on the land my father loved. But sometimes peace must be reclaimed. Sometimes justice isn't about vengeance. It's about making sure the roots stay in the ground. They demolished my cabin, but I still owned the shoreline, and now they would never forget it. The morning fog rolled over the lake like a soft breath curling between the pines and across the water's surface. I stood on the newly built porch, cedar beneath my bare feet, the railing warm from early sunlight, and watched the mist lift, slowly revealing the smooth ripple of the lake that had once held every memory I tried to forget. But this time it didn't hurt to look. The cabin stood quietly behind me. Fresh wood-clean lines, new walls. But somehow it didn't feel new. It felt right. As if the land had accepted it just as it had accepted the first one, built by my father's hands. Inside, everything was where it should be. The kitchen window still faced the dock. The fireplace crackled with that familiar rhythm, burning logs, split from the same grove my father once walked through tools. I'd placed his old flannel jacket on the coat hook by the door, not because I expected to wear it, but because it belonged there like a sentry, watching over the space. I brewed a cup of black coffee just the way he used to, and stepped back out onto the porch. Across the lake, the clubhouse sat like a humbled monument, still standing but quieter now. The Meadow Hills community used it sparingly. Monthly potlucks, a yoga class on Tuesday mornings, no more board meetings packed with arrogance, no more enforcement raids masked as compliance checks. The people had taken it back, because sometimes all it takes to tear down a regime is one person who says, enough. And I did. But not for glory, not for applause. For silence, for space, for the right to live on land that bore my name before any Meadow Hills HOA charter ever existed. The new board had been true to their word. Every condition was honored. The cabin was rebuilt not just in size and shape, but in spirit. The rent for the clubhouse land arrived each month like clockwork, signed, notarized, and deposited directly into the scholarship fund I had started in my father's name. Harper Shore Fund. For local kids who wanted to study forestry, environmental law, land surveying, anything that helped them understand the worth of ground beneath their feet. Matthew contributed to the fund too. Said it made him feel like part of something bigger. He'd started coming out more often, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. He helped me build the bench that now sat under the oak tree by the water's edge. We carved our initials into it one afternoon without saying much. Just JH plus MH. Two quiet men learning how to love again through sawdust and sweat. Even Pam got her lavender field. You owe me a flower box, she'd teased, and I built her two. One for the cabin, one for her porch across the way. She came over every Sunday now, usually with pie, and sometimes we just sat and watched the ducks. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't have to. The land had already said enough. Every now and then I get letters. From strangers. From other homeowners who read about the case in small-town newspapers or heard through whispered HOA threads online. People who faced similar overreach. People who had cabins, gardens, or stories ripped away in the name of property value. They always ask me the same thing. How did you win? And I always tell them the truth. You don't win by yelling louder. You don't win by playing their game better. You win by knowing where your feet stand, by owning your roots, and by never ever letting go of the truth, no matter how quietly it sits in a locked strongbox under a dusty floorboard. There's a moment each evening just after the sun dips below the tree line When the lake turns gold, not orange, not pink, gold. And in that moment, I can feel him, my father, sitting beside me on the porch. No words, just the crack of a cold beer and the weight of peace earned, not given. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to, because he sees it too. They tore down the walls, but not the legacy. They tried to erase the man, but the shoreline still remembers his name, and now so does the world.